400 people watched him destroy my daughter, and no one moved. My son-in-law raised his glass, smiling like a king. "Look at her," he said. "This is what happens when you walk away from power. You become nothing." My daughter stood there soaked in wine, one hand on her stomach. "I'm carrying your child." He smirked. "Then you made an even bigger mistake. I don't keep liabilities, I erase them." The room erupted in laughter. That's when I stood. "I own this building," I said quietly. The laughter died instantly, because my son-in-law didn't just humiliate my daughter, he just signed his own downfall. Before we go further, I'm grateful you chose to stay. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, your city, your country? Let's see how far this reaches. Note: some elements of this story are fictional, built for storytelling and education. Names and settings are coincidental. The message, however, is one worth carrying with you. The phone buzzed at 8 o'clock exactly. Unknown number. A link. 3 words beneath it. "Please watch this." I pressed play. The ballroom came through immediately. 400 guests, chandeliers, blazing, the blur of formal wear moving between tables. Then the camera steadied, and it found her. Isabella, standing alone at center floor, champagne white dress, soaked dark with red wine, one hand pressed flat against her stomach. The stain ran from her hair down across her shoulders, bleeding into the fabric in long, uneven streaks. Around her 400 people, talking, drinking, not one of them moving toward my daughter. Marcus had the microphone. "Taste it, Isabella." His voice filled the speaker, clean and unhurried, the voice of a man who believed he owned every room he walked into. "Jadi, that's the flavor of the poverty you chose the day you walked away from your family's name." I set the phone face up on the desk, looked at it, did not look away. Isabella's voice came through raw and split open at the edges. "You are a monster. I am carrying your child. My child." Marcus laughed, one short sound, like the idea genuinely amused him. "That's the chain, isn't it? That's what you thought you'd use to lock me into this dead-end life, into that broken wreck you call a family." The laugh dropped away. What replaced it was quieter and worse. "Tonight, Isabella, you are fired from my life." The room on the screen erupted. Laughter rolling from multiple tables. Applause from somewhere near the back, actual applause. A man I recognized, Douglas Pembroke, raised his glass in a small, satisfied toast. I noted his face. I put the phone face down on the desk. My right hand moved to the armrest of the chair. I felt my fingers close around the leather. I was aware, very specifically aware, of the choice not to squeeze, of the discipline that required, of what it cost. I held it for 3 seconds. Then I turned the phone back over. "Keep going," I said to the screen, to a man who couldn't hear me. "Keep talking, Marcus. The higher you build this tonight, the further it all falls." Nathaniel called before I reached for my own phone. "Dad." His voice had that particular tightness, controlled, waiting, the sound of a man who has already decided what he wants to do and is holding himself back from doing it. "I've seen it. Cars are ready. Tell me what you want." "Where are you?" 7 minutes out, maybe less." "Drive. The second I walk in that room." "Drive first," I said. "We do this right, not fast." A pause. "He's still on the microphone," Nathaniel said. "Every second we sit here is another sentence he's delivering in front of 400 witnesses." I kept my voice even. "Every word out of his mouth tonight goes on record, Nate. I need him to keep talking. I need all of it." Silence on the line. Then flat and deliberate, "Understood." 5 minutes, I said, "not 7. 4, he said, and hung up. I stood, walked to the window. Chicago on a Friday night at 8 o'clock. The lake sitting black and flat beyond the skyline, Michigan Avenue lit up below. The city running its ordinary machinery, completely indifferent to what was happening in one ballroom 30 blocks south. I pressed my palm flat against the glass and looked down at the street, at the small, bright squares of cab rooftops moving through intersections, at people on sidewalks who had no idea. I thought about the last time I had spoken to Isabella. 14 months ago, a brief call that ended in silence, because neither of us knew how to cross the distance that had grown up between us. Distance she had chosen. Distance I had allowed, because I understood it even when it hurt. She needed to believe she had built something on her own. I had let her believe it. What I had not been able to do was let her burn alone. I turned back to the desk, picked up the glass of scotch that had been sitting untouched since 6 o'clock. My hand closed around it, and something in the grip went wrong before I'd made a conscious choice about anything. The stem snapped clean. One sharp crack very small in the quiet of the office, and pieces scattered across the leather desk pad with a sound like punctuation. I looked at my hand, a thin red line across the palm. Clean. Not deep. I looked at the glass fragments on the desk, at the scotch spreading slowly across the leather. I did not move for 4 seconds. Then I folded my handkerchief over my palm, picked my jacket off the back of the chair, and put it on with the same precision I use for everything: left arm, first collar, straight, each button from the bottom up. I checked my reflection in the dark glass of the window. 62 years old. Black suit. A face that gave nothing away. Marcus Drake had spent 5 years building what he called his empire deals. Closed contracts, signed. Investors lined up. And he had never once thought to ask why the right people always knew his name before he introduced himself. Never stopped to question why doors opened so easily. Why credit came through so cleanly. Why certain partners seemed almost eager to say yes. Men like Marcus accept good fortune as confirmation of their own greatness. They never look at the foundation. Tonight I was going to show him what was underneath his feet. I picked up the phone. The live stream was still running. Isabella hadn't moved, same spot, same posture, hand flat against her stomach, chin, level eyes, fixed ahead. Not collapsed. Not running. Holding. The way her mother held in the last year of her life through things that should have broken her. I turned the screen off. It's time, I said to the empty office, for the Harringtons to take back what's theirs. I walked to the elevator. The doors opened without a sound. I stepped in. They closed. The car began to descend, and in the mirrored walls I watched my own reflection coming at me from every angle, a 62-year-old man in a black suit cut on his palm, completely still. Marcus had performed brilliantly tonight. He just didn't know yet who had written the script. Nathaniel drives like the road owes him something. My son, 34 years old, built for exactly this kind of night, had the SUV cutting through Friday traffic on Michigan Avenue before I'd finished buckling in. He didn't ask questions. He already knew the destination and the reason, and right now the only thing standing between him and the Grand Meridian was 6 blocks of Chicago asphalt. I opened the live stream and turned the volume up. The footage was still running. Marcus still had the microphone. 400 people in this room listen clearly. His voice came through the speaker, sharp and deliberate. Isabella is the single greatest failed transaction of my life. She thought this pregnancy was a golden ticket. She thought it would lock me in. A short pause. Wrong? Nathaniel's hands shifted on the wheel. Not a small movement. He just called your grandchild a failed transaction. His voice was quiet, the dangerous kind of quiet. Dad let me go in first. 5 minutes. Just Nate. 5 minutes alone with Nate. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Eyes on the road. He exhaled. Hard. Gripped the wheel and said nothing. I kept my eyes on the screen and opened the Notes app on my second phone with my left hand. Started writing names. Every face I could identify in the crowd. Every person laughing. Every person raising a glass. Every person who looked away and kept drinking. This was not rage. This was documentation. You have a list going, Nathaniel said. He could see the second phone in the mirror. Every witness, I said. Every name I can pull from that crowd. For the lawsuit. For multiple lawsuits. I wrote down 2 more names. What he said into that microphone tonight, intentional infliction of emotional distress, public defamation harassment of a pregnant woman. All of it recorded, all of it time-stamped, all of it delivered in front of 400 people he personally invited. I looked up at the road. He built his own courtroom tonight, Nate. He just doesn't know it yet. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Dad, the other investors? The ones in that room right now. What about them? They watched. Some of them clapped. I know. Are we going to... The ones with active credit facilities through Capital. I said, have loan agreements containing a moral conduct clause. It's standard language, most borrowers never read it. It states that conduct causing material reputational damage to associated parties constitutes a technical default. I set the second phone down. By applauding tonight. In a filmed and time-stamped public event, they triggered it themselves. Nathaniel let that sit for 3 seconds. So they handed you the weapon. They handed me the paperwork, I said. There's a difference. Everything gets processed through proper legal channels. My attorneys file the notices go out, every step follows procedure. I looked back at the screen. I don't need to cut corners. The corners cut themselves tonight. On the footage, Isabella was still in the same position. Chin level. Not collapsing. Hold on, I thought. 10 more minutes. You wanted independence. Marcus was still performing for the room. You wanted to prove you didn't need the Harrington name. Look around you, Isabella. Look at what standing on your own actually looks like. He's about to see what he built from the ground up. Nathaniel said it low and flat. He's about to see hell. He's about to see something much worse than hell, I said. Hell is chaos. What's coming for Marcus Drake is organized. The Grand Meridian appeared through the windshield, its entrance blazing gold against the October dark valleos moving under the canopy, a line of town cars at the curb. A party still running at full brightness, completely unaware that the night had already changed direction. Nathaniel hit the accelerator for one final block. Then the brakes. The SUV stopped hard at the curb tires biting into asphalt, the jolt of it clean and final. A valet stepped forward and then stepped back when he saw Nathaniel's face through the glass. Smart kid. I put both phones in my breast pocket. Straightened my jacket. Looked at the entrance. 400 people inside eating Marcus Drake's food, drinking his wine, laughing at his performance. Most of them had no idea who had underwritten the building they were standing in. That was about to change. Ready, Nathaniel said. I opened the door. Not this party, I said, just became a sentencing hearing. I stepped out into the cold Chicago night and walked toward the entrance without slowing down. I remember the first day he walked through that door, 7 years ago. October, same cold, same Chicago sky, sitting gray over the lake. Marcus Drake was 28 years old, wearing a suit that fit him well enough to signal ambition, but not so well as to look inherited. He'd done his homework on the optics. I'll give him that. He smiled when he shook my hand. Too wide, too warm. The kind of smile that arrives exactly on cue. He thinks he's fooling me, I thought. He has no idea this meeting is already over. I gestured to the chair across my desk. He sat down like he owned the chair. Mr. Harrington. His voice was measured, practiced. I know what you must be thinking. A man without the right last name asking to marry your daughter. He paused. He liked his pauses even then. I want to be honest with you. I don't need anything from the Harrington family. Not money, not connections, not a name. I love Isabella for who she is. For her mind, her character. Another pause. I will spend every day of my life proving I deserve her. I looked at him for a long moment. He held the eye contact. Points for that. Good, I said. Then you won't have any objection to signing a prenuptial agreement. Something moved behind his eyes. Very fast. A calculation running and finishing in under a second. Oh, of course not, he said easily. Draw it up however you feel is right. I opened the desk drawer and placed the document on the table between us. 41 pages. My attorneys had spent 5 weeks drafting it. The core terms, I said, are straightforward. If this marriage ends due to infidelity, psychological abuse, financial fraud, or any conduct determined to constitute willful harm to Isabella, or any children of the marriage, you forfeit all rights to shared assets, all claims against the Harrington estate, and all custodial rights pending full court review. I folded my hands. You would leave this marriage with exactly what you brought in. Nothing more. He picked up the document, flipped through it fast, skimming, not reading. Stopped at the signature page. This seems very thorough, he said. It is. My own attorney should probably take 2 weeks, I said. I'm in no hurry. He shook his head. A man demonstrating that he had nothing to hide. He picked up the pen. He signed it. 30 seconds. 41 pages. He signed without reading past page 3. I watched his pen move across the signature line and thought, there it is. That's who you are. A man who signs what he hasn't read because he's too busy performing confidence to exercise caution. I collected the pages, straightened them against the desk, stood to shake his hand. Welcome to the family, Marcus. His handshake was firm. His smile was back, the rehearsed one, arriving exactly on cue. You won't regret this, sir. He left. Nathaniel came through the side door before the elevator had finished closing. He'd been in the adjacent room the entire meeting. Listening. You're actually letting her marry him. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a man trying to understand something that didn't make sense to him yet. Yes. Dad, sit down, Nate. He sat, slowly. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Gray sky. Lake sitting flat and cold in the distance. He came in here to perform, I said. Every word was scripted. The humble background, the self-made ambition, the love that doesn't need money. I turned around. He signed a 41-page legal document in 30 seconds because he was too busy playing the role of a man with nothing to hide. That doesn't mean I've been reading men like Marcus Drake for 40 years, I said. I know exactly what he is, and I know exactly what he wants. I sat back down at the desk. Isabella loves him. That part is real. Her love is completely real. I won't take that from her. She needs to learn this herself. What I can do is control every condition surrounding it. Nathaniel was quiet. The 200 million, he said finally. I nodded. Over the next 18 months, I said Capital's subsidiary funds will extend credit facilities and investment backing to Drake Consulting Group through 4 anonymous intermediary vehicles. Marcus will believe these opportunities came to him because the market recognized his talent. I picked up the signed prenup and placed it in the filing drawer. He will build quickly. He will build large. He will become exactly the kind of man he always believed he was destined to be. And when it all comes apart, in which every loan carries a behavioral default clause, I said. Every contract runs through an entity I control. Every partner who signs with Marcus does so because someone in my network made a call. I closed the drawer. He will believe he built an empire. What he will have built is a very elegant trap. Nathaniel stared at me. Keep your enemies close, he said slowly. Keep them comfortable, I said. A comfortable enemy stops watching the perimeter. I looked at the door Marcus had walked out through 30 seconds ago, still faintly moving on its hinges. Every conversation he has in the offices we finance. Every email sent through servers housed in buildings we own. Every deal meeting held in conference rooms that belong to Harrington's subsidiaries. I let that settle. 7 years from now, if I'm right about who he is, and I am right, every word he has ever spoken will be documented and waiting. Nathaniel said nothing for a long moment. And if you're wrong, then none of it ever gets used, I said. And Marcus Drake lives a long, successful life thinking he built everything himself. I looked at my son. I would be glad to be wrong. I wasn't wrong. 7 years later, sitting in the back of an SUV 3 blocks from the Grand Meridian, I knew exactly what was waiting on those servers. Every whisper, every meeting, every conversation held in rooms Marcus never thought to question. All of it documented, all of it mine. I walked through those doors, and the room stopped breathing. Not figuratively. The conversation cut out table by table the way a power outage moves through a city block, one section going dark, then the next, until the only sound left in the Grand Meridian ballroom was the distant clink of a glass someone had already set in motion before they looked up and saw me. 400 people, every single one of them knew the name Harrington. I didn't slow down. The crowd parted without being asked, small steps, backward bodies creating a lane through the center of the floor without any of them consciously deciding to do it. That's what 40 years of a certain kind of power looks like in a room. You don't part the crowd parts itself. I walked through the middle of it, like the aisle had always been there. My eyes were on Isabella. I noted Scarlett Voss near the far table, Douglas's daughter, though she carried her mother's name. And nobody in this room knew the connection. I had met her once, 12 years ago, when she was still a student. She had her father's eyes and her father's patience. Both had served her well. She was exactly where the Livestream had shown her far wall alone. The dress destroyed the wine long dried into rust. Her hand was still on her stomach. She hadn't moved. Of course she hadn't. She saw me from 20 feet away. Her face did something I hadn't seen in 5 years, something that cracked open fast, and then tried to close again, because she was in a room full of people and she was a Harrington and Harringtons. Don't collapse in public. She almost managed it. I reached her in 6 more steps. I shrugged the jacket off my shoulders without breaking stride, and placed it around her in one motion, covering the stain, covering the wet fabric, covering everything Marcus Drake had done to her in the last hour. My hand stayed on her shoulder for one moment. "Ah, Bella." I kept my voice low, just for her. "Are you hurt, the baby?" "We're okay." Her voice was barely holding together. "Dad, I'm sorry, I should have." He said I didn't have anyone left. He said, "Look at me." She looked up. "You have me," I said. "You have Nathaniel. That's not nothing. That's never been nothing." I held her gaze. "The blood in your veins is Harrington blood. It doesn't fall for people like him. Not one drop of it. Do you understand me?" Her chin was shaking, but she nodded. She didn't cry. My daughter never cries in public. That is her mother down to the bone. "Well, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Marcus's voice came from my left. I turned slowly. Not fast would have suggested urgency. And urgency would have suggested he was worth urgency. I turned the way you turn when something mildly inconvenient has happened that you already know how to handle. He was standing 12 feet away. Scarlett Voss a half step behind him. The micro in his hand still live. His jaw was set. His posture was rigid. A man performing composure he didn't have. "Edward." He said my name like a word he was testing the weight of. "You were not invited to this event." I own this event," I said. "I own the room it's being held in. I own the building this room is in." I let that land. The Grand Meridian has been a Harrington Group property since 2019. The lease for tonight was processed through a subsidiary, which means the floor you're standing on, the microphone in your hand, the chairs your guests are sitting in. I paused. "All of it is mine." "Marcus," It's been mine for 2 years. His mouth opened, closed. That's... He turned to look at the room, then back at me. Security. Someone get security up here right now. Nathaniel's voice came from my right. Daniel Blackwood had been my head of facility security for 11 years. I had called him at noon. By 2 o'clock, he had briefed every member of the Grand Meridian security staff quietly, through proper management channels as the building's owner is fully entitled to do. The security team in this building reports to Harrington Group Facilities Management. My son stepped forward, 34 years old, completely still. The particular kind of stillness that takes up more space than movement. Daniel handled the briefing 2 hours ago. They've been ready since 8. As if on cue, 4 members of the hotel security team moved from their positions at the perimeter of the room, closing off the main exits at a measured pace. No raised voices, no weapons. Just 4 large men in black uniforms, repositioning themselves with the calm efficiency of people executing a prearranged plan. Every guest in the room watched it happen. Marcus watched it happen. I watched Marcus watch it happen. Yuka. His voice had lost its steadiness. The rehearsed edges were gone. You can't just... Sit down, Marcus. I am not... Sit down. The room was completely silent. Marcus Drake, the man who had stood at a microphone an hour ago with 400 people in the palm of his hand, looked around that same room and found 400 faces looking back at him, with something very different from what had been there before. He sat down, not gracefully. The way a man sits when his legs have made the decision before his pride could stop them. I straightened my cuffs, turned back to Nathaniel. Get your sister to the car, I said quietly. Stay with her. Nathaniel nodded once. His hand went to Isabella's elbow, steady sure. She let him guide her without looking back. I turned back to the room. 400 witnesses. Every exit covered. A live camera still running somewhere in the crowd. Sophie Mercer, I suspected, still holding her phone up with the same steady hands she'd had all evening. Marcus was in his chair, looking up at me. For the first time tonight, he looked like what he actually was, a man who had been performing in a theater he didn't own on a stage that had never belonged to him, in front of an audience that was now watching someone else entirely. You put on a very good show tonight, I said. He said nothing. But the director, I said, is on stage now. Nathaniel was gone. Isabella was safe. The room was mine. I walked to the head table at center stage, pulled out the chair at the top, and sat down. Picked up the wine bottle already sitting on the table, a 2017 Napa Cabernet Good Vintage, probably chosen by a party planner Marcus had paid with money he didn't own, and poured myself a glass. Unhurried. 400 people watched me do it. Not one of them made a sound. Marcus was still in his chair 6 feet away, where he'd been since his legs had made the decision to sit before his pride could stop them. He was watching me with the eyes of a man running calculations that kept coming back wrong. I set the bottle down, reached into the leather document case Nathaniel had left on the table before walking out, and placed a bound folder in front of Marcus. Open it, I said. He didn't move. Marcus, I picked up my glass. Open the folder. He opened it. The first page was a corporate structure chart. Clean, precise, the kind of document my attorneys produce when they need a judge to understand something without ambiguity. At the top, E.H. Capital Trust. Below it, a cascade of subsidiaries holding companies and investment vehicles spreading downward in neat labeled branches, highlighted in yellow at multiple points throughout the structure, names Marcus knew very well. His face changed as he read. Drake Consulting is mine, he said. His voice was still trying for firmness. Every dollar in that company came from investors who believed in my work. I built that from nothing. You built it from $200 million, I said. Where did you think that money came from? From Pembroke Capital. He looked up. Douglas Pembroke saw my projections. He ran due diligence. He made a business decision. Pembroke Capital is a registered trade name, I said, for the Harrington Educational Legacy Trust, a fund I established 7 years ago under Illinois Trust Code as a protected asset vehicle for my unborn grandchild. I took a slow sip of wine. You weren't being backed by an investor who believed in your talent, Marcus. You were being paid a management fee to grow money that was already earmarked for the child you called a chain around your neck tonight. The color left his face in stages. That can't be legal. It's entirely legal, I said. The trust is properly registered, the investment mandate is documented, and every transaction was processed through licensed financial intermediaries. My attorneys will provide full disclosure to your counsel tomorrow morning. I set my glass down. What isn't legal is what you did with it. He was staring at the chart, turning pages. His hands weren't steady. The other investors, he said. Cornerstone, the Meridian Partners, those weren't. Turn to tab 4. He turned to tab 4. Another chart. Different structure, same conclusion. Every significant capital partner in Drake Consulting Group's history traced back through holding layers to the same source. 7 years ago, I said I made a decision. I could block the marriage lawyers use leverage, make it difficult enough that it fell apart on its own. Or I could let it happen, keep you close and wait. I folded my hands on the table. Close is better. Close means I could see everything. Close means every office you leased was in a building I owned. Every server your company ran on was housed in infrastructure. I controlled every contract you signed, was reviewed by intermediaries who reported back to me. Marcus set the folder down. He looked at me. You're telling me, he said slowly, that for 7 years, every significant deal you closed had my fingerprints somewhere in the chain, I said. Not because I was generous, because I was building a record. I reached into the document case and produced a second folder, thinner, tabbed with red. The behavioral default clauses in your credit agreements, the conduct provisions in your investment contracts, the representations you certified to in writing regarding your personal conduct and the stability of your marriage. Chiku, I opened it to the first tab. You violated all of them tonight. On camera. In front of 400 witnesses you personally invited. The room was absolutely silent. Then I looked to my left and gave a single nod to the hotel's AV technician, a young man who had been standing at his station for the last 20 minutes, waiting for exactly this signal. The ballroom's main display screen came to life. Numbers, clean organized, formatted the way a bank statement is formatted when a law firm wants it to be readable in court. Total outstanding debt across all Capital credit facilities, $214 million. Current status default triggered. Full acceleration notice pending. Effective date October 16, 2021. 9 a.m. Marcus stared at the screen. The number sat there in the silence of the room, patient and immovable the way large numbers always are when they belong to someone else. You can't accelerate all of it simultaneously. The acceleration clause activates automatically upon certified default, I said. The default was triggered at approximately 8:15 this evening when you made public statements recorded, time-stamped and witnessed, that directly contradict the representations you certified in your loan agreements. I closed the folder. My attorneys filed the preliminary notice 40 minutes ago. The formal demand letter goes out tomorrow at 9. Marcus's mouth was open. Nothing was coming out of it. I stood, picked up my wine glass, looked at him one final time at the suit that fit him well, at the cufflinks, catching the light at the carefully assembled surface of a man who had genuinely believed, that what he had built was his. Drake Consulting Group has no liquid assets that aren't either pledged as collateral or held in accounts I control, I said. The equity in your office lease goes back to a Harrington subsidiary. The car outside was purchased through a company line of credit that defaults tonight. I set the glass down. You don't have $1 to your name that isn't already mine, Marcus. I buttoned my jacket. Even the suit, I said, was bought with money you borrowed from my grandson's trust fund. Before I reveal the recording that ended Marcus Drake, type "I'm here" in the comments. Because once this plays, there is no version of tonight where he walks away clean. Worth noting, portions of this story are fictional, crafted to entertain and leave you with something to think about. If you'd prefer to stop here, this is your moment, otherwise stay close. Marcus was on his feet before the echo of my last sentence had finished moving through the room. Proof. His voice cracked at the edges, but he forced it through anyway, the way a man forces things through when the alternative is admitting he has nothing left. You want to sit there and destroy everything I've built? Then show me proof. Real proof. Show me one document that isn't manufactured, one number that isn't manipulated, one single piece of evidence that didn't come from your own people. He was looking at me like a man who still believed there was a move available to him. I looked at Nathaniel. One look. That was all it took. Nathaniel lifted his phone, tapped the screen twice, and looked up at the AV technician positioned at the control station on the left wall, a young man who had been standing at his post for the last 25 minutes, waiting for exactly this signal. The ballroom's LED display screen, 12 feet wide, installed 3 years ago during the Grand Meridian's renovation, funded by a Harrington Group capital improvement budget that Marcus had never thought to question, went dark. 2 seconds of complete black. Then it came back up. Timestamp in the upper left corner. March 3rd, 2021, 11:47 p.m. A room I recognized without effort. Conference Room B, 14th floor. Drake Consulting Group offices, a suite in a building whose server infrastructure had been maintained by a Harrington Group technology subsidiary since the property changed hands in 2018. The camera angle was fixed upper corner wide enough to capture the full table. Standard placement. The kind that looks like ordinary building security because it is ordinary building security, installed by people who work for me in a building that belongs to me. Marcus was in the frame. So was Scarlett Voss. She was sitting across the table from him, a glass of wine between her hands. Her face tilted toward the light in a way that the camera caught clearly. She looked like a woman who believed she was in a private conversation. She looked relaxed. She was wrong on both counts. The audio came through the ballroom speakers, clean and sharp. The same sound system, the same microphone feed, the same speakers Marcus had used less than 2 hours ago to tell 400 people that his pregnant wife was a failed transaction. The timing has to be exact. Marcus's voice filled the room, unhurried, the voice of a man working through a logistics problem. The highway section between Oak Brook and the city. Eastbound curve. Low guardrails, the elevation drops off on the right shoulder. If the brake line is compromised correctly, it presents as mechanical failure. Standard wear. No investigation gets opened. Scarlett's voice quieter. What about the pregnancy? Not a flinch, not a pause. If she doesn't survive the accident, the pregnancy doesn't either. That resolves both problems simultaneously. Silence on the recording for 3 seconds. Scarlett again. And after you promise you'll marry me, you actually swear it. Marcus completely level, I swear it. Under Illinois probate law, Isabella's estate transfers to her surviving spouse. The Harrington assets she inherited, the trust distributions, all of it comes to me. Then to us. The clip ended. The screen held on the final frozen frame. Marcus's face in that conference room, mid-sentence, lit clearly by the overhead fluorescence, completely identifiable, completely unambiguous. The room didn't explode immediately. It went through a sequence. First, a collective breath pulled in across 400 people simultaneously, the sound of it almost physical in the silence. Then, 3 full seconds of complete stillness, where everyone in that room processed what they had just heard. Not gossip, not rumor, not a financial document requiring interpretation. A man's voice, his face, his words. Planning his pregnant wife's death in a room he didn't know was being recorded. Then the sound started. It began at the back tables and moved forward like something rolling downhill low at first, then building. Voices layering on top of voices until the room was filled with something that had no politeness left in it at all. 400 people who had come to celebrate an anniversary. Now witnesses to a murder conspiracy. Marcus moved before the sound had fully built. He lunged toward the screen, 3 fast steps, arm reaching up, like he could pull the image down with his hands. He made it 2.5 steps. 2 members of the security team were already in motion, stepping cleanly into his path from either side, catching both arms simultaneously and pulling him back with the practiced efficiency of people who had been positioned for this exact moment. No strikes, no escalation. A clean hold. Both arms secured, his forward momentum stopped and reversed in one smooth motion. He struggled hard for about 4 seconds. Then he stopped. His chest was heaving. That's fabricated. The performance was gone from his voice entirely. What was underneath it was thinner and more desperate. That's AI generated. You can synthesize anyone's voice now. You can put words in anyone's mouth. Everyone knows that you can't just play a clip and call it. The recording was captured by a fixed security camera in a building owned by Harrington Group, I said. I stayed in my chair. I didn't raise my voice. The audio was processed through the building's existing surveillance infrastructure. The files have been stored on servers under continuous custody by my IT team since the night of recording, with an unbroken chain of digital custody documentation. I folded my hands on the table. Every metadata timestamp is intact and independently verifiable. The original file hash was logged and notarized the following morning. My attorneys delivered authenticated copies to the Chicago Police Department at 6:30 this evening, 90 minutes before we arrived here. Marcus opened his mouth. The lease agreement for your office suite, I said before he could speak, contains a standard building security disclosure clause. Page 9, paragraph 4. It notifies all tenants of continuous security monitoring throughout common areas and building infrastructure spaces. You signed that lease, Marcus. Your signature is on page 41. I paused. Consent was documented before you ever moved in. He stared at me. Nathaniel stepped forward from the right side of the stage. The mechanic you hired to modify the brake assembly, he said, his voice carrying across the silent room without effort, turned himself in to the 18th District Station on Michigan Avenue at 7:40 this evening. Before we walked in here. Before any of this. He let that settle. He brought the tools he used. He brought photographs he took before and after the modification. He brought a signed written statement detailing every conversation he had with you, including dates, locations, and the amount you paid him in cash. A pause. He also brought the brake component itself. Your fingerprints are on it in 3 separate locations. The sounds from the crowd had changed again. Louder, less controlled. A woman at the front table stood up. Not dramatically, just stood, pushed her chair back, and stepped away from it, putting physical distance between herself and the side of the room where Marcus was standing. Then a man at the next table, then 2 more people, then 3, not a rush toward the exit. Just people standing up one by one in the quiet, deliberate way that means something different from panic. It means I am not with him. I want everyone in this room to see that I am not with him. Marcus's eyes moved around the room, fast, desperate, looking for a face that would look back at him with something other than what was currently on every face in that building. He found nothing. You set all of this up, he said, quietly, almost to himself. This whole night, every piece of it. Yes, I said. He looked at me. I set all of it up. I said, because 7 years ago I shook your hand and understood exactly who you were. And because you left me no other option the day you decided that my daughter's life was a problem to be solved. I stood. The only way to stop a man like you is to let you finish what you're doing. Document every step of it and be standing in the room when you're done. I buttoned my jacket. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder in Illinois carries a sentencing range of 20 years to natural life, I said. With a cooperating witness in custody, authenticated physical evidence, a verified recording, and 400 people who just watched all of it. I looked at him one final time. Your attorney is going to have a very long night. I turned toward the exit. You came into my family planning to take everything, I said, without looking back. Instead, you spent 7 years building me the case I needed. I walked out. I was almost at the exit when Marcus found his last lifeline, or what he thought was one. Douglas. His voice broke on the single word, not theatrically the way it had broken earlier when he was still performing, but with the particular rawness of a man who has run out of moves and knows it, and is reaching for the one card he thinks he has left. I stopped walking, turned around. Douglas Pembroke was standing at the edge of the stage, 60 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who fills a room without raising his voice. He had come in from the side corridor unhurried, his suit impeccable, his expression carrying the specific neutrality of someone who has known for a long time how this evening was going to end. Marcus crossed the floor toward him at something between a walk and a run. Douglas, listen to me. He reached for Pembroke's arm. Everything they just showed, it's fabricated, all of it. Edward has been running a campaign against me for years, and tonight is the end of it. He's taking everything, my company, my assets. His voice was speeding up, words tumbling over each other. You have pull in this city. You have relationships I don't have access to right now. You promised me 18 months ago that if I ever needed... Pembroke looked down at the hand on his arm. Marcus released it. I need you to back me, Marcus said. I need a capital injection tonight, a statement. Something that tells these people the Drake Consulting Group has a future. No. One word, flat, final. Marcus stared at him. Googleless. I don't invest in dead companies, Marcus. Pembroke's voice was unhurried and completely without apology. And I don't invest in the men running them, when those men have just had their murder conspiracy played on a 12-foot screen in front of 400 witnesses. He straightened the cuff of his jacket. Particularly not when the man in question is as genuinely contemptible as you've proven yourself to be tonight. We've worked together for 5 years, Marcus said. His voice had dropped to something almost unrecognizable. 5 years of deals, 5 years of dinners and handshakes, and 5 years of me watching you, Pembroke said, and waiting. The room was very quiet. Marcus looked at him. Something was shifting in his face, the beginning of an understanding arriving too late. The way understanding always arrives for men like Marcus only after every exit is already closed. Waiting for what? He said. Pembroke glanced across the room at me, then back at Marcus. Edward saved my life, he said simply. 15 years ago. My company was collapsing. My family was in debt. I had made decisions I couldn't undo, and I was out of options. He didn't have to help me. There was nothing in it for him. A pause. He helped me anyway. Without conditions. Without terms. Pembroke's eyes were steady. When a man does that for you, you don't forget it. You wait for the day you can return it. Marcus was very still. When he called me 7 years ago, and told me what he needed. Pembroke continued. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I structured the Pembroke Capital vehicle exactly as he specified. I made the introductions he needed me to make. I attended the meetings, I signed the documents, I played the role of the independent investor who saw genius in Marcus Drake. He said the last 3 words with a particular precision that made them land like something being set down heavily on a table. You were never my investment, Marcus. You were my obligation, paid in full. The silence in the room had a different quality, now denser, more complete. The silence of 400 people who have stopped expecting anything else to surprise them and are being surprised anyway. Marcus's mouth opened, and Scarlett is my daughter. The words dropped into the room and stayed there. Marcus turned slowly. Scarlett Voss was standing 12 feet behind him near the edge of the stage, her arms at her sides. The relaxed performance was gone from her posture. What was underneath it was something sharper and less accommodating. She looked at him the way you look at something you have been studying for a long time and are finished with. She kept her mother's maiden name after the divorce, Pembroke said. Voss. I suggested it when Edward and I first discussed the arrangement. Easier that way. He paused. She has been careful, Marcus. She never fabricated anything, never manufactured evidence, never created situations that didn't already exist. She simply stayed close to you, let you speak freely, and documented what you said. His voice was even. Everything you confessed to in that conference room you confessed because you wanted to. She just made sure someone was listening. Marcus turned to look at Scarlett directly. She met his eyes without flinching. 3 years, he said, not a question. 3 years, she confirmed. Her voice was quiet and entirely steady. You told me things you never would have told anyone who you thought might still be listening when it was over. The full shape of it hit him then. I could see it move across his face, not one revelation, but the whole architecture of it, every layer arriving at once. The investors who were never independent. The deals that came together too easily. The woman he thought he'd recruited as an ally who had been placed in his life with surgical precision. The building he thought he'd leased. The conference room he thought was private. The company he thought he'd built. Every room he'd ever felt safe in. None of them had ever been his. He took one step backward, then another. His heel caught the edge of the stage platform. He sat down hard on the floor, not a dramatic fall, just a man whose legs stopped working at the same moment as everything else. I walked back across the room slowly, stopped in front of him, looked down. Pembroke moved to stand at my right. Scarlett, after a moment, moved to stand at my left. Marcus looked up at the 3 of us and said nothing. You spent 3 years believing you had found a weakness in my operation, I said. A woman who loved you, a partner who backed you, a city that was finally yours. I looked at him. The lifeline you grabbed tonight was never a lifeline. It was exactly what I needed you to grab. I turned to leave. A lead weight dressed up as a rope. I said, only pulls you down faster. Nathaniel walked back onto the stage with a white envelope in his hand. He hadn't rushed. He moved the way he always moves when something important is happening, with the measured pace of a man who knows the weight of what he's carrying and isn't going to drop it. Marcus was still on the floor where his legs had given out. He'd pulled himself upright against the edge of the stage platform, sitting with his back against it, tie loosened, the composed surface of him completely gone. Around him, 400 people who had stopped expecting the evening to end had just discovered it wasn't over. Nathaniel stopped in front of him, held up the envelope. This arrived at the Harrington Tower mailroom 6 weeks ago, he said. Forwarded from an address in Coral Gables, Florida. The sender requested it be passed to our legal team. He turned it over in his hand. Her name is Diana Reeves. Marcus's face didn't change immediately. Then it did. It went through the change. the way a wall goes through an explosion, holding for 1 second, then coming apart all at once. Diana wants to know, Nathaniel said, his voice carrying across the silent room without effort, why the child support payments stopped 3 months ago. She has 2 sons. They're 4 years old, both of them. He looked down at Marcus. Twins, as it turns out. I don't know anyone by that name. Marcus's voice came out hollow, automatic. The last reflex of a man whose instinct for denial was still running even after everything else had shut down. She's lying. She's trying to extort. Not the DNA results, I said, have been on my attorney's desk since 7 this morning. I reached into the document case on the table and placed a single page in front of him. A lab report. Clean formatting. Probability of paternity 99.97%. Marcus looked at it. He didn't pick it up. Saw 2 boys in Florida, Nathaniel said. A marriage certificate filed in Miami-Dade County dated March 14, 2015. He let that land. 6 months before your wedding to Isabella, the room absorbed that. Which means, I said, that your marriage to my daughter was void from the moment you said the words. Under Illinois law, a marriage entered into by a person who is already legally married is invalid, not voidable, not subject to divorce proceedings. I folded my hands. Void, as if it never existed. That also means, Nathaniel said, that everything you believed you were entitled to through that marriage, every asset claim, every inheritance expectation, every legal standing as Isabella's spouse was based on a document that had no legal force the moment it was signed. Marcus was staring at the lab report, not reading it, just staring at the white space around the numbers. You never had a marriage, I said. You had a performance, and you performed it in front of a judge, a priest, and 200 guests, while a woman in Coral Gables was raising your children alone. The FBI field office in Chicago. I said, received a referral from our legal team 4 days ago. The financial flows through Drake Consulting Group over the last 3 years, specifically the irregular capital movements between the Miami subsidiary accounts and the Chicago operating entities, are consistent with a pattern their financial crimes division has been tracking since 2019. I watched his face. I'm not going to call it what it is in this room tonight. That's their job. A pause. But they have the same documents I have, and they've been considerably more interested in the Miami connections than I expected them to be. Marcus was very still. You used my daughter, I said quietly, as a cover. A respectable Chicago marriage, a prominent family name, a legitimate business address. Clean on the surface. I looked at him, and underneath it, money that needed somewhere to go. I'm not accusing you tonight, I said. I'm telling you what the federal investigators are going to be asking you about tomorrow morning. I straightened the document on the table. You might want to call your attorney before then. You're going to need one who handles more than civil litigation. The silence that followed had a particular texture. The silence of 400 people who had stopped trying to process events individually and were simply absorbing them. Then Scarlett moved. She had been standing to my left for the last 10 minutes, still and contained, watching Marcus with the expression of a woman who has spent 3 years documenting someone and is finally watching the last page of the file close. She crossed the stage in 6 steps. Marcus looked up. She hit him open-handed across the face, clean, decisive, the full weight of 3 years behind it. The sound of it moved through the room like a punctuation mark. Marcus's head snapped to the side. He didn't fall. He sat there with his cheek reddening and looked up at her. 3 years, she said. Her voice was steady and completely cold. I spent 3 years watching you, listening to you, sitting across tables from you while you planned how to kill a pregnant woman." So she looked down at him. "I knew you were bad. I didn't know you were this." She stepped back, stood beside her father. Pembroke put one hand briefly on her shoulder, said nothing. Marcus sat on the floor of his own anniversary party, the party he had planned in the building he thought he owned, surrounded by the investors he believed were his, beside the woman he thought was loyal, and looked at the wreckage of every calculation he had ever made. I looked down at him one final time. 62 years old, black suit, a cut on my palm that had stopped bleeding an hour ago. "Diana's boys will have their father's name corrected on their birth certificates," I said. "The child support arrears will be paid from the frozen Drake consulting accounts before any other claims are processed. That happens first." I paused. "Isabella's marriage is void, which means she walks away from this evening with her full legal standing restored and not one obligation to you remaining." Marcus said nothing. "You're going to be in a federal building tomorrow," I said. "Then a courtroom. Then somewhere that doesn't have windows." I looked at him without anger, without satisfaction, with the simple finality of a man closing a chapter he has been writing for 7 years. "You won't see daylight again for a very long time, Marcus." I turned and walked toward the exit. The room let me through. The slap had been a mistake. Not morally, she didn't regret it. But it had been unplanned emotional, the one moment in 3 years where she had stopped performing and let something through. And the second it landed, she understood that the offshore accounts were no longer a private matter between herself and a spreadsheet. And she moved toward the side corridor before the thought had fully finished forming. She made it to the side corridor before Nathaniel stepped in front of her, not running. Scarlett Voss didn't run. She moved with the controlled precision of a woman who had spent 3 years learning how to exit situations without drawing attention. A measured pace, a slight angle toward the service hallway, the body language of someone heading to the restroom rather than the door. Nathaniel had been watching her for the last 4 minutes. He stepped into the corridor entrance and stopped there, hands in his pockets, completely blocking the path. Scarlett pulled up short, looked at him. "Ms. Voss." His voice was pleasant, the particular pleasantness that has nothing warm in it. "Stay with us a little longer." She glanced back at the ballroom, at her father still standing near the stage, at the 400 people who had turned almost as one to watch this new development. She looked back at Nathaniel, made a calculation, turned around and walked back into the room. I was still near the stage when she returned. She stopped 6 feet from me and straightened her shoulders, the old composure reassembling itself the way it had been before this evening started, before the clip played, before the envelope opened. "Mr. Harrington." Her voice was steady, measured. "I did everything you asked. 3 years. Every conversation documented, every meeting recorded, every piece of evidence handled exactly as your legal team specified." She held my gaze. "I kept my end of the arrangement. I'm asking you to keep yours." "And what was yours?" I asked. "Safe passage, clean exit, the agreed compensation." She paused. I held up my side. "I want what we agreed on." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked at Nathaniel. He reached into his jacket and produced his phone, opened a file, turned the screen to face the room. A transaction record, clean columns, dates, amounts, account numbers. The kind of document that a forensic accountant produces when they've been given full access to a company's financial infrastructure and told to find everything. Drake Consulting Group's operating account, Nathaniel said, shows 11 transfers over a 14-month period. The destination account is registered in the Cayman Islands under a holding entity incorporated in 2020. He looked at Scarlett. The total transferred is $10,200,000. A pause. The holding entity traces back to a beneficial owner through two shell layers. The beneficial owner is you. Scarlett said nothing. Not part of our arrangement, I said. I earned. You were compensated for your work through the channels we agreed, I said. Not what you did separately using your access to Drake Consulting's financial systems to move company funds into your own offshore account. That wasn't something I authorized. I kept my voice even. That was something you did for yourself using a position I gave you. The money in those accounts came from Capital subsidiaries, she said. Technically, Nathaniel said, it came from a company whose financial records are under forensic review as of this morning, which means every transaction in and out of Drake Consulting's accounts is documented time-stamped and currently in the possession of investigators who are very interested in where money went. He put the phone away. $10 million in unexplained transfers to an offshore entity is not a technicality, Ms. Voss. It's a federal charge. She looked at me. Something had shifted in her face, not the collapse that had taken Marcus apart piece by piece, but something quieter and in some ways more complete. The look of a woman who had been playing a longer game than anyone knew and had just found out that someone had been playing a longer one still. You knew, she said. I've known since the 7th transfer, I said. 14 months ago. And you let it continue. I let you continue, I said. There's a difference. You were still useful. The work you were doing was still producing what I needed. And I paused. I wanted to see how far you'd go. She absorbed that. Your securities broker license, Nathaniel said, has been flagged with FINRA as of this afternoon. The filing cites undisclosed conflicts of interest and ongoing regulatory investigation. Your ability to operate as a licensed financial professional in any capacity is suspended pending the outcome. He looked at her steadily. That's separate from the criminal exposure. That's just the professional consequence. My father, she said quietly, doesn't know. No, I said, he doesn't. Across the room, Douglas Pembroke was watching his daughter. His face had the expression of a man who can see from a distance that something is wrong but hasn't yet been told what it is. He was old enough and careful enough not to move until he understood the situation. He was going to have a very difficult conversation with her before the night was over. I'm not going to pretend this is personal, I said to Scarlett. You did the work you were asked to do and you did it well. 3 years is a long time and it wasn't easy, and I'm aware of that. I folded my hands. But you used the access I gave you to take money that wasn't yours from accounts that were under my protection during an operation I was running. I looked at her. In my organization, that is the one thing I don't negotiate around. Not for loyalty, not for service, not for anyone. Scarlett looked at the floor, then back up at me. What happens now? She said. Not a plea. A question from someone trying to calculate the remaining variables. The federal investigators already have the transfer records, I said. That part is out of my hands, and I want to be clear I didn't give it to them to punish you. It was part of the broader financial disclosure that went in with the Drake Consulting package. Your accounts were in the same documents. I paused. You'll need an attorney. A good one. Not the one Marcus is about to call, because he's going to have enough to handle. She nodded once. Small. Controlled. The arrangement we had, I said, is closed. Whatever you built from it, legitimately, your time, your work, the compensation that was agreed, that stands. The rest goes through the legal process. I looked at her directly. I don't enjoy this part. But I don't make exceptions either. Pembroke had crossed the room. He stopped beside his daughter. He looked at her face and understood without being told that something had gone wrong that he hadn't accounted for. He put his arm around her shoulders anyway. She let him. I turned to address the room one final time. 400 people who had come to a party and witnessed something else entirely. No one in this room walks away from tonight unchanged, I said. Some of you made choices earlier this evening, choices about who to applaud and who to ignore. I looked across the faces. I keep records. I always keep records. A pause. But I'm not here to punish an entire room. I'm here because my daughter needed someone to stand up. I picked up my jacket from the chair. In the game of Harrington, I said quietly to no one in particular and everyone simultaneously, there is no such thing as a free move. I walked toward the exit. Nathaniel walked to the AV station one more time. No announcement, no preamble. He simply plugged in a drive, spoke 2 words to the technician, and stepped back. The speakers came to life, a room. Late at night, the ambient sound of it unmistakable, the particular quiet of an office building. After hours, the faint hum of HVAC and nothing else. Then Marcus's voice, unhurried and completely alone with whoever was on the other end of the call. Sayakite, the pregnancy is the problem. It always has been. Once she's showing, once there's a child, the courts get complicated, the asset division gets complicated, everything gets complicated. A pause. So the child needs to go first, before anything else moves. How? The voice on the other end, male, unidentified. There are compounds. Not the legal ones, the ones you can source through the right channels. Colorless, odorless, dissolves in liquid. Causes spontaneous termination within 48 hours. Looks completely natural. No investigation. A beat. I placed the order 2 weeks ago. It arrives Thursday. The recording ended. The room was a held breath. 400 people. Not one sound. I had been standing still for the last 90 seconds. I stayed still for 3 more. Then I turned to look at Marcus. He was in his chair. Had been since his legs gave out 40 minutes ago, had been through the Pembroke revelation and the Diana Reeves letter and the Scarlet exposure. Had sat through all of it with the diminishing composure of a man watching his exits close one by one. Now he was looking at the speaker on the far wall, like it had said something in a language he didn't speak. What about I said, what did you just say about my grandchild? My voice came out quiet. That was the most frightening thing about it. I know that. I've been told that by people who have seen me angry and people who have seen me quiet. And they all say the same thing, the quiet is worse. Marcus's voice had no steadiness left in it at all. That was months ago. I was drinking when I made that call. I wasn't in the right state of mind. I didn't actually... 2 weeks ago, Nathaniel said. He was holding a document. A package was intercepted at the Drake Consulting Group mailroom, which, as we've established, operates through building infrastructure managed by Harrington Group. The package originated from an overseas supplier operating outside FDA jurisdiction. He set the document on the table. It contained a controlled compound used to induce miscarriage, not a legal pharmaceutical. The kind of thing that, administered without the recipient's knowledge, constitutes poisoning. He looked at Marcus. The package was logged, photographed, and held. The contents were replaced with prenatal vitamins before delivery. Marcus stared at the document. Isabella has been taking vitamins for 2 weeks, Nathaniel said. She thought they were from you. Something moved through the room at that not sound exactly, but a collective shift. The physical sensation of 400 people absorbing something and finding they don't have a framework for it. I attempted poisoning of a pregnant woman, I said. In Illinois, that's attempted first-degree murder with a sentencing enhancement for the targeting of a vulnerable victim. I looked at him. Add it to the conspiracy charge from the brake line. Add it to the bigamy. Add it to the federal financial investigation. I paused. Your attorney is going to need a team. Marcus opened his mouth. I don't know what he intended to say. It didn't matter. 62 years old. 35 years of discipline. 40 years of sitting across from men I despised and keeping my hands flat on the table and my voice at the same register and my face giving nothing away. One moment, that's all it takes. I crossed the distance between us in 4 steps. The tat came from somewhere below conscious decision. Not a swing, not a punch. An open-handed strike across the face with the full weight of everything that had been accumulating since 8 o'clock, since the livestream, since the wine running down my daughter's hair, since the recording of a man calmly discussing the disposal of an unborn child like a logistical problem. Marcus's head snapped hard to the right. His body followed. The chair legs caught on the stage platform edge and gave way, and he went sideways off the chair and hit the floor, one shoulder catching the corner of the table on the way down. He lay there for a moment, not moving, a thin line of red appearing at his temple where the table edge had caught him. The room did not make a sound. Nathaniel stood to my right and did not move to stop me. He had known, I think, that this moment was coming, had known since 8 o'clock when he heard the recording the first time, and had been waiting the way you wait for weather, for the thing you can see building on the horizon. I looked down at Marcus on the floor. My breathing was even. My hands were still. The storm had passed through in exactly 4 seconds and left the same silence behind it that had been there before. Every charge I've laid out tonight, I said, carries mandatory minimum sentences. The conspiracy, the poisoning attempt, the bigamy, the federal financial exposure. I straightened my cuffs. Stack them together, and you will not see the outside of a federal facility for the rest of your functional life. I looked at him. You will not see Isabella. You will not see any child that carries your name. You will not sit in a room with windows and choose what to eat for breakfast. Marcus was pulling himself upright, slowly. One hand against the floor, the other pressed to his temple. He looked up at me. Hell, I said, is too comfortable a word for what's waiting for you. I turned away from him. The ballroom stretched out in front of me, 400 people who had come for an anniversary celebration and had witnessed instead 7 years of architecture collapsing in 90 minutes. Some of them were standing. Some were still at their tables with drinks they'd stopped touching an hour ago. All of them were watching me. I walked through the center of them. The room parted, the same way it had when I walked in without being asked, without a word, bodies stepping back on instinct to create the lane. I walked through it and didn't look back. Behind me, I heard Marcus say something. I don't know what it was. It didn't reach me. Nothing he said had ever really reached me. The doors opened. I walked out into the corridor, and the sound of the ballroom fell away behind me, and there was nothing left but the quiet of a building I owned, and the particular exhaustion that comes not from effort, but from the end of something you have been carrying for a very long time. It's done, I said, to no one. To Eleanor, maybe, to the version of myself that had stood at a window 7 years ago and made a decision. It's done. I had almost reached the corridor doors when the movement at table 12 caught my eye. Not dramatic, just a man standing up, but in a room that had been holding itself very still for the last 20 minutes. Any movement drew the eye. He was in his late 60s. Gray suit, no tie, the kind of bearing that comes from decades of being the most consequential person in any room he walked into. He had been sitting at the table in the far corner, the position with the widest sightline across the ballroom floor, the seat where you can see everything without being easily seen for the entire evening. I had put him there myself. He picked up his glass, finished what was in it, set it down with the deliberate care of a man who has never been in a hurry in his life, and walked toward the stage. The room watched him come. Robert Harrison served as a United States District Court judge for the Northern District of Illinois for 19 years before his retirement in 2019. Before the bench, 12 years as a federal prosecutor. Before that, a decade trying cases in Cook County that nobody else wanted to take. Retired or not, He remains the most legally consequential person in any room he enters. When Robert Harrison shows up somewhere, it is because he has decided his presence serves a specific purpose. Tonight that purpose was to watch. I had called him 3 weeks ago. Not to ask a favor, Harrison doesn't do favors, which is precisely why I trust him, but to extend an invitation with full disclosure of what the evening was likely to contain. I told him what I intended to present, and what I needed from him if the evidence held up the way my attorneys believed it would. He had listened without interrupting. Then he had said, "Send me the guest list. I'll be at table 12. That was the entire conversation. Marcus saw him coming from 30 feet away. I watched it register the recognition, then the confusion. Then, the particular cold arithmetic of a man trying to calculate what the presence of a federal judge at his anniversary party actually meant. Robert, his voice came out unsteady. You're here. I didn't know you were on the guest list." "I wasn't," Harrison said. He stopped in front of Marcus and looked at him with the expression of a man who has seen a great many people in very bad situations and has long since stopped finding it surprising. "Mr. Harrington extended a separate invitation. I accepted it. He invited you to—" Marcus looked at me, then back at Harrison. "You're part of this. He got to you too." "Nobody gets to me, Marcus." Harrison's voice was unhurried and completely without heat. "In 31 years on the bench and at the bar, that has never happened. It's not going to start tonight." He set his hands in his pockets. "I came because I was told there would be evidence worth seeing. I've been sitting at that table for 2.5 hours. I've seen the financial documentation. I've heard the recordings. I've reviewed the DNA results and the chain of custody filing on the pharmaceutical intercept." He paused. "I've seen enough." "It's fabricated," Marcus said. The word had worn thin from overuse. It came out sounding like something he was saying because he didn't have anything else, not because he believed it. "The metadata on the surveillance files is intact and independently verifiable," Harrison said. "The cooperating witness has already provided a sworn statement at the 18th District. The DNA lab is accredited, and the chain of custody is documented." He looked at Marcus directly. "I've reviewed stronger evidence than this result in convictions. I've also seen weaker evidence than this produce guilty pleas on the courthouse steps." A pause. "What you have tonight is not a fabrication. What you have is a problem that is not going to get smaller." Marcus looked around the room. The exits were still covered. The arrest warrant for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, Harrison said, was signed earlier this evening by a duty magistrate judge at 5:40 this evening, based on the cooperating witness statement and the physical evidence submitted by Harrington Group's legal team. The warrant for the pharmaceutical charge attempted poisoning of a pregnant person was signed at 6:15. He reached into the inside breast pocket of his jacket and produced 2 documents, folded together, the official seal of the Northern District of Illinois, visible on the outer face. Both warrants are valid and active. A Chicago PD unit and a U.S. Marshals representative have been waiting in the building's service corridor since 8:30 this evening. He held the documents out not to Marcus, but to the room, a gesture that was less about the transfer of paper and more about the weight of what those pages represented, displayed in front of 400 witnesses. "Now, I want to be completely clear," Harrison said, "because I am aware that this is an unusual setting for these proceedings, and I want the record to reflect accuracy." He looked at Marcus. "You are not being convicted tonight. You are being arrested. You have the right to an attorney, and if you cannot afford one, one will be appointed for you, though, given the financial picture that's been presented this evening, that may actually be relevant." A pause. "You will be arraigned. You will have the opportunity to enter a plea. The evidence will be tested in a courtroom through proper process, and you will have every right afforded to you under the Constitution. He put the documents back in his pocket. But I will tell you from 31 years of experience evaluating evidence, he said, that I have rarely seen a case constructed with this degree of documentation. Your attorneys are going to have a very difficult road. Marcus sat back down, not from choice, from the same reason he'd sat down twice before tonight, because his legs made the decision without consulting the rest of him. I walked back to where Harrison was standing. Robert, I extended my hand. He shook it. Edward. His eyes moved to the door. Your daughter is outside, in the car with my son. Good. He nodded once. She doesn't need to be in this room for the next part. I looked at Marcus one final time, 62 years old. One cut on my palm. One strike 40 minutes ago that I didn't regret and wouldn't apologize for. A night that had taken 7 years to build and 90 minutes to deliver. Done. Marcus, I said. He looked up. Monday morning, I said. 9 o'clock, courtroom 4. I turned and walked toward the doors. Behind me, I heard Harrison speaking in a low, even voice, the voice of a man beginning the formal part of a process that would continue long after tonight. I heard the corridor doors open and the quiet, purposeful sound of officers moving into the room. I didn't look back. The doors closed behind me, and the ballroom became something else, not a party, not a stage, not an arena, just a room where something had ended. I walked down the corridor toward the exit, toward my daughter. The main doors came open hard, not kicked, pushed both panels simultaneously, the kind of entry that happens when several people move through a doorway with shared purpose and no intention of slowing down. 4 agents in dark jackets, 2 Chicago PD officers in uniform, and a U.S. Marshal who had been waiting in the service corridor since 8:30. The room, which had spent the last 90 minutes cycling through shock and silence and outrage, went completely still one final time. This stillness was different from the others. This one had the particular quality of something ending. The lead FBI agent was a woman, mid-40s, dark jacket with credentials visible at the belt. The kind of face that has spent 2 decades reading rooms and doesn't waste time on the ones it's already read. She moved through the parted crowd without pausing, her eyes already on Marcus before she'd covered half the distance. He saw her coming. He got to his feet, the same automatic movement, the last reflex of a man whose body was still trying to perform competence while everything else had given out. She stopped 2 feet in front of him. Marcus Allen Drake. Her voice was even and carried without effort. You're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, bigamy, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and attempted poisoning of a protected person. She produced the warrant, the same documents Harrison had referenced now being deployed for their intended purpose. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. She nodded once to the officer behind her. The handcuffs came out. The sound of them clicking into place, that small, dry, mechanical sound, moved through the ballroom like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Marcus's composure lasted exactly as long as it took the metal to close around his wrists. Then it was gone. Edward. His voice cracked open, not the theatrical crack of a man performing distress, but the raw sound of someone who has run completely out of options and knows it. He turned to find me in the crowd. Edward, listen to me. Whatever I did, I can fix it. I can give you everything back, every dollar, every contract. I'll sign whatever you need. I looked at him, said nothing. Isabella still loves me. His voice was getting louder. The agent had a hand on his arm but wasn't moving yet, giving the words space to land in the silence of the room. She doesn't know everything. She doesn't know what happened tonight. Not all of it. If you let me talk to her, just 5 minutes, she'll... My daughter, I said, is in a car outside this building with her brother. She is safe, she is warm, and she is as far from you as this city allows. I looked at him steadily. She will not be speaking to you tonight. She will not be speaking to you again. The baby. His voice broke on the word. That's my child. You can't keep me from, shut the child. I said, we'll be born into a family that will love it without condition and protect it without hesitation. It will carry a name that means something in this city. I paused. What name that is Isabella's decision to make, not mine, and certainly not yours. But I will tell you this, that child will never be told its father was a monster. It will be told its father was absent. There is a difference, and I will give my grandchild that mercy even though you don't deserve it. Marcus's mouth moved. Nothing came out. The agent tightened her grip and began moving him toward the exit. He went 2 steps, then his knees buckled, and he tried to plant his feet, twisting back toward me. The officer behind him catching his arm to keep him upright as he pulled against the hold with the graceless desperation of a man who has nothing left but motion. I'll tell them everything. He shouted at me at the room at Harrison, who was still standing near the stage at the 400 faces watching this final scene. I'll cooperate. I'll give them names. I'll give them the Miami accounts. I'll give them everything. Mr. Drake. The agent's voice cut through cleanly. That conversation happens at the field office, not here. She moved him firmly toward the door. He went. Across the room, 2 officers had moved to where Scarlett was standing with her father. Pembroke had his arm around her shoulders. His face had the look of a man absorbing something very difficult and choosing in this moment to absorb it quietly. Scarlett looked at the officers, looked at her father. Then she straightened her shoulders and took 1 step forward. I'll walk, she said. I'm not going to make this harder. She looked at the lead officer. I want to speak to the prosecutor's office tonight. I have documentation, financial records, communication logs, account structures. A pause. I'll cooperate fully. The officer nodded. Pembroke kept his hand on her arm for 1 moment longer than necessary. She let him. Then she walked toward the exit, without being guided ahead of the officers, her posture controlled, and her eyes forward. Whatever she was carrying it herself. I watched her go. There was nothing simple about Scarlett Voss. She had done what she'd been asked to do, and she had also helped herself to something she hadn't been authorized to take. And now she was navigating the consequences of both with more composure than most people manage. I didn't admire it exactly, but I understood it. The room exhaled. 400 people who had arrived for a celebration and witnessed instead the complete structural collapse of a man they had some of them genuinely believed in. A few of them were already on their phones. By morning, this would be everywhere. I had anticipated that. I had in fact counted on it. I stood in the center of the emptying room and let the last of the evening settle around me. The chandeliers were still burning. Someone's half-finished champagne was still on a table nearby, the bubbles long since gone flat. The stage where Marcus had stood 2 hours ago with a microphone and 400 people in his hand was empty now, the mic stand still there, tilted slightly from where it had been bumped. Your crimes end tonight, I said quietly to the room Marcus had just been removed from. Everything you built on borrowed ground, it's over. I looked at the door he'd been walked through. But the damage you left behind, I said, doesn't end with you. That takes longer. That takes time and care, and the kind of patience that has nothing to do with strategy. I picked up my jacket from the chair where I'd left it. That part is just family, and it's the hardest part of all. I walked toward the exit. The room let me through. The noise fell away the moment the door closed. 1 second, the city was everywhere. Cold air voices spilling out from the Grand Meridian's entrance, the distant sound of someone still talking at a high pitch inside the building we'd just left. Then, the SUV door shut, and there was only the engine and the dark and the particular quiet that belongs to a sealed space moving through the night, with nowhere urgent left to be. Nathaniel pulled away from the curb. Isabella was beside me in the back seat. She had my jacket still around her shoulders. The wine stains on her dress dried to a deep rust that caught the passing streetlights in uneven patches. Her hands were folded in her lap, one resting lightly over her stomach, the way they had been all evening, that unconscious, constant gesture of protection that I had noticed the first second she appeared on the live stream and had not been able to stop thinking about since. She hadn't spoken since Nathaniel brought her to the car. I hadn't pushed. We moved north on Michigan Avenue, the city sliding past in its usual indifferent brightness, and I let the silence be what it was: not empty, not uncomfortable, just the kind of quiet that two people share when they have too much to say and haven't yet found the first word. She found it first. "Oh, why did you let it go on for 5 years? Her voice was low. Not accusing, the accusation had been drained out of it somewhere in the last 2 hours, replaced with something raw and more honest. The voice of someone who genuinely needs to understand. She was looking at the window, not at me. "Did you hate me for leaving, for choosing him over the family?" A pause. "You can tell me the truth. I'm not going anywhere this time." I looked at her profile in the passing light. 28 years old. Her mother's cheekbones. My stubbornness, which had never done either of us any favors. I didn't hate you," I said. "I've never hated you for a single day of your life." I turned to face forward. "I hated myself for not finding a way to tell you what I saw in him without making you feel like I was choosing the family name over your happiness." I paused. "I made that calculation wrong. I've known it for 5 years." She said nothing. "And I let it continue," I said, "because there was no version of this where I could show you the truth without you living it first. If I had come to you in year 1 with documents and recordings and told you everything I knew, you would have believed I manufactured it. You would have believed I was doing what I always did, which was try to manage your life from a distance." I looked at my hands. "You needed to arrive at the truth yourself. I just needed to make sure you survived the journey." Isabella's chin was trembling. She kept her eyes on the window. "And I was so alone," she said. "There were nights when I didn't know how much longer I could hold on, and I kept thinking, if he doesn't love me anymore, at least I still have my own life, my own decisions." Her voice dropped. "And then I started to realize I didn't even have that. And I thought, there's no one left. I've burned everything down. Bella," she turned to look at me, "every night." Nathaniel said from the front seat quietly, without turning around, "For 4 years, Dad would park on the street below your building. Not every night. Most nights." He paused. "Just to make sure your light was still on." Isabella stared at the back of her brother's head. "He never told me that," she said. He never told anyone," Nathaniel said. She looked at me. I looked back at her. "There were nights the light was off by 8 o'clock, I said. "Those were the nights I stayed longer, until it came back on." I folded my hands. "I wasn't going to let you disappear into the dark, Isabella. Whatever distance you needed, whatever you needed to believe about standing on your own, I was always going to be on that street. That was never negotiable." She made a sound that was somewhere between a breath and a sob, and immediately pressed her fingers to her mouth to stop it. "My daughter doesn't cry in public, but this wasn't public. This was a car. Her father, her brother. The 3 of us moving through the Chicago night with nowhere left to perform for anyone." She cried. Not the crumbling, graceless kind. The quiet kind. The kind that comes when something that has been held under pressure for a very long time finally finds a way out. Her shoulders shook once, twice, and then steadied. And she turned and put her head against my shoulder, the way she had when she was 6 years old and had a nightmare she couldn't describe. I put my arm around her. "Didn't say anything," Some things don't need words. Some things are just weight and warmth, and the fact of being present after a long absence, and any words laid over the top of them only get in the way. We drove in silence for a while. The city moved past. The lights changed. Nathaniel drove the way he does when there's no emergency, steady, unhurried, giving us the time. Then I felt it. I had moved my hand without thinking, had placed it gently against the side of Isabella's stomach, the way you do when you want to acknowledge something without making it a moment. Just a hand, just a presence, and the baby kicked, hard, decisive. A single strong movement against my palm that lasted less than a second, and stopped as if whoever was in there had said exactly what they wanted to say, and was satisfied. Isabella laughed. It came out surprised and wet, and completely real, the first genuine laugh I had heard from her in 5 years, startled out of her by 8 ounces of someone who had already decided to make their presence known. She does that, Isabella said. When she hears voices she doesn't recognize. I said. Isabella looked up at me, a small, tired, real smile. She confirmed. I looked down at my hand, still resting against the warm fabric of the jacket. Eleanor, I thought. You were right. She held. She held the whole time. Welcome home, princess, I said quietly, not to Isabella, to both of them. Nathaniel made a sound in the front seat that he covered very quickly with a cough that didn't fool either of us. The city kept moving past the windows, bright and cold, and completely indifferent the way cities always are. But inside the car, there was warmth and the sound of breathing, and my daughter's weight against my shoulder, and a small, fierce person making herself known against the palm of my hand. It was enough. After 5 years, it was more than enough. The house was quiet in a way that only old houses know how to be. Not empty full, in fact, with the accumulated weight of everything that had happened in the last 4 hours. The kind of quiet that settles over a space after a long storm has passed through and left the air changed. Nathaniel had gone to the kitchen without being asked, the way he always does when he needs something to do with his hands. Isabella stood in the entrance hall and looked around at the familiar things, the dark wood paneling, the portrait above the staircase, the particular smell of old books and candle wax, and something underneath both that she had grown up calling simply home. She had not been inside this house in 5 years. She was looking at it like someone reading a language they used to know fluently, and are finding with surprise that they still remember every word. Come with me, I said. The library is at the back of the house, past the formal sitting room, and through a door that requires a specific pressure in the upper right corner to open properly, a quirk of the original construction that I have never had fixed, because Eleanor used to say it kept out people who weren't paying attention. I pressed the corner. The door opened. The room inside was exactly as it had always been. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, a reading table in the center, 2 chairs angled toward the fireplace. I had asked the housekeeper to light the candles before we arrived. Not the overhead lights, just the candles the way Eleanor preferred it in the evenings. The flames threw soft, moving light across the spines of books and the edges of the portrait above the mantel. Eleanor, painted the year before she was diagnosed. She was 44 in the portrait, dark-haired, looking slightly to the left of the painter, with the expression she always had when she was thinking about something she hadn't said yet. Isabella stopped when she saw it. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she walked in and sat down in the chair closest to the fireplace. The same chair she had always chosen as a child, the one with the worn armrest on the left side, and looked up at her mother's face. I went to the desk in the corner, opened the bottom drawer. The envelope was where it had always been, beneath the stack of photographs, cream-colored, the handwriting on the front faded, but still unmistakably hers. The ink had gone slightly translucent with time, the letters carrying the particular fragility of things that have been handled very carefully for a very long time. On the front, in Eleanor's handwriting, for Isabella. When the storm has passed. I brought it to her. She saw the handwriting before I'd fully extended my hand. Her breath caught. When did she write this? I sat down in the opposite chair. 1 month before she passed. She called me into this room, sat in that chair, and gave it to me herself. I folded my hands. And she told me to keep it until you had been through something hard enough that you needed to hear her voice more than you needed advice. I paused. She said I would know when. Isabella turned the envelope over in her hands. Her fingers traced the letters of her name. She always knew things before they happened. She said quietly. Yes, I said. She did. Isabella broke the seal. The paper inside was 2 pages folded in thirds, the same cream stock as the envelope. She unfolded it with the careful hands of someone handling something irreplaceable, and in the candlelight, I watched her eyes move to the first line. She read aloud, her voice low and slightly unsteady. Bella, my love, if your father has given you this letter, then you have been through something that hurt you in a way I couldn't protect you from. I'm sorry for that. I want you to know I thought about you every day of the last year of my life, and what I thought about most was this: you are going to be tested. Not by circumstance, by your own heart. You will love someone who does not deserve it, because that is what generous hearts do. They give before they know the cost. Isabella stopped, pressed her lips together, kept reading. And don't be ashamed of that. The love was real, even if the person wasn't worthy of it. Your capacity to love is not diminished by the fact that someone failed to honor it. Remember that. She lowered the page for a moment. Just a moment. Then she raised it again. Your father will be there. He will not catch you immediately. And if you're reading this and feeling angry at him for that, please hear me. I asked him not to. You needed to find your own footing. But he will be on the street below your window, Bella. He will always be on the street below your window. That is who he is. That is who he has always been. The candle nearest her flickered. She set the letter down on her knee and looked at me. Neither of us said anything. She knew, Isabella said finally, about you parking outside. She knew everything about me, I said. She usually knew it before I did. Isabella looked back at the letter. Read the last section silently, her lips moving slightly. When she finished, she folded it along its original lines and held it against her chest with both hands. I waited. There's something else, I said. Something she arranged. Isabella looked up. 11 years ago, in the last months of her life, your mother established a trust. The Eleanor Harrington Legacy Trust. I leaned forward slightly. $500 million. Structured as a protected generational asset under Illinois Trust Code. The primary beneficiary is her first grandchild. I paused. The trust has been administered since her death through a series of investment vehicles. Some of those vehicles intersected with Drake Consulting's operations. Over the last 7 years, Marcus managed a portion of those funds as a contracted investment advisor through an intermediary, without knowing who the underlying beneficiary was or where the capital originated. Isabella stared at me. He was working for his own child, she said slowly. He was working for his own child. I confirmed. Without knowing it. Without ever thinking to ask. I settled back in my chair. The trust transfers to your daughter upon her birth. It cannot be claimed, contested, or accessed by any party other than the named beneficiary and her legal guardian. I looked at Isabella. You. She looked down at the letter in her hands, at her mother's handwriting visible through the folded paper, at the faint impression of words written 11 years ago by a woman who had been thinking, in her last months of life, not about what she was losing, but about what she was leaving behind. She planned this, Isabella said. And she started it, I said. I finished it, but the foundation was hers. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. The candles moved. Eleanor's portrait looked slightly to the left of where we were sitting, the way it always had, with the expression of someone who has already thought 3 moves ahead and is content to let everyone else catch up. She always saw further than the rest of us, I said quietly. Isabella pressed the letter to her chest one more time. Then she looked up at her mother's face in the candlelight and said very softly, Thank you, Mom. The fire crackled. The house held the sound of it. The fire had burned lower. The candles were still going, 3 on the mantel, 2 on the reading table, but the room had settled into the particular amber quiet of late night. The kind of light that makes everything look like a painting of itself. Isabella was still in her chair, the letter folded on her knee, looking at the fire with the expression of someone who has just set down a weight they'd forgotten what life felt like without. I went back to the desk. Not for the envelope. The envelope had served its purpose. The other drawer. The one I had opened only far enough to see what was inside on the night this all began, and then closed because there was still work to do. Tonight the work was done. I lifted out the album and set it in front of her. Dark green cover, no label. Ordinary looking. Nothing about it suggested what was inside. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it," I said. The first photograph was dated October 2016. 5 years ago, 1 month after she'd moved into the Wicker Park apartment with Marcus. She was at the farmer's market on Division Street, Greycoat, holding a paper bag and laughing at something the vendor had said. The laugh was real. I remembered being relieved by that, standing across the street with my phone thinking, she's okay. She's still laughing. Isabella looked at it for a long time, turned the page. More photographs. A coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue. The lakefront path on a Sunday morning, hands in her pockets, looking at the water. The entrance to her building in the early evening. Isabella coming home with too many grocery bags cutting into her wrists because she refused to make 2 trips, that detail so specifically her, that looking at it made something in my chest contract. She turned pages slowly, not speaking. Then she stopped. March 2019. Northwestern Memorial, the main building on Erie Street. Nighttime. The entrance lit against the dark. And in the frame, barely visible through the lobby glass, a figure in a gray coat sitting near the information desk, with his hands folded on his knees. "Me. This night," she said quietly. "I slipped on the ice. Hairline fracture. I waited 4 hours in the ER alone thinking there's nobody to call." She looked up. "You were inside the hallway off the main corridor," I said. "Close enough to see when they moved you to a treatment bay. I stayed until I could ask the night nurse without being identified whether the patient with the ankle injury was stable." 4 hours, she said. "Until 2:40 in the morning. Why didn't you come in?" I looked at my hands. "Nathaniel had my arm the entire time," I said. "He kept saying the plan isn't finished. If you walk in there tonight, Marcus finds out you're being watched. He changes his behavior. We lose everything." I looked at her. He was right. That didn't make it easier to sit in that hallway. Isabella closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were bright, but she held herself together the way she always does by deciding to. "Did you hate me?" she asked. "Even a little? For putting yourself through this?" "Isabella, I need to know." "No," I said. "Not for a single second. How could I hate the best thing your mother and I ever made? How could I hate the person who carries her laugh, her stubbornness, the exact way she tilts her head when she's deciding whether to say something difficult?" I shook my head. "I was never angry at you. I was angry at myself. For the years I made you feel like love in this family came with conditions. That's what I would undo." She was quiet. "I hated that I had to watch you carry something that was mine to dismantle," I said. "That took too long. I move faster next time." Isabella made a sound that was almost a laugh. "There is no next time," she said. "No," I agreed. "There isn't." She looked back at the album. 5 years of Saturday mornings and evening commutes, and 1 terrible night in a hospital hallway. All of it documented with the quiet patience of someone who had committed to a task and intended to see it through. She closed the cover, set her hand flat on top of it. Then she stood up, and I stood up, and she crossed the 3 feet between us and put her arms around me, not the careful, tentative embrace of two estranged people navigating distance, but the full, certain hold of a daughter who has come home and knows it. I held her. Her hair still smelled faintly of wine that hadn't fully washed out. She was warm and solid and real, and the baby shifted between us when she pressed close, a small, insistent presence making herself known. We stayed like that for a long time. The fire moved. Eleanor looked down at us from above the mantel, slightly to the left of where we were standing, with the expression of a woman who has already thought 3 moves ahead and is content to let the rest of the world catch up. "I should have done some of this differently," I said into her hair. "Not all of it, but some of the middle." "You did what you thought was right," she said. "That's not always the same thing as doing it right." She pulled back enough to look at me. "Dad," she said, "you stood outside my window for 5 years." A small shake of her head. "I think that counts." I looked at my daughter, 28 years old, 6 months along wine-stained dress, and my jacket still around her shoulders. Her mother's eyes in a face that had carried more than it should have been asked to. Sturdy Eleanor had said near the end. "I want her to be sturdy." She was. She was exactly that. "Protecting you," I said, "was never about holding your hand through it. It was about standing far enough back that you could find your footing, and close enough that if you fell—" I paused. "But you were never falling into nothing." She held my gaze. Then she nodded. "Once. And that was enough." Chicago was quiet. Not the held breath quiet of a room full of people deciding what to feel. Not the loaded silence of a ballroom waiting for the next thing to happen. This was the other kind, the quiet that belongs to a city after midnight. When the machinery slows, and the streets thin out, and the lake wind moves through the gaps between buildings with nothing left to push against. The storm had passed. The 3 of us were standing on the back balcony of the Harrington house, 11 floors up, looking out at the skyline, the way this family has always looked at it, not as something to admire, but as something to reckon with. A thing built by human hands over human time, full of human decisions, good and bad and still standing. Nathaniel had appeared from the kitchen 10 minutes earlier, with 3 cups of tea on a tray, without being asked. That had been Eleanor's ritual tea at the end of difficult evenings, carried out to whatever space the family had gathered in, set down without ceremony. None of us had ever formalized it. It had simply continued the way certain things continue in families, passed through habit rather than intention. He handed a cup to Isabella first, then to me, kept the third for himself, and stood at the railing beside his sister. The skyline was the same as it always was. The Hancock Building lit up to the north, the Willis Tower further west, the ribbon of Michigan Avenue below us, a few taxis still moving, the odd pedestrian, the ordinary evidence of a city that does not stop for anyone. I had stood on this balcony with Eleanor more times than I could count, in the early years when the city felt like something we were still learning, in the middle years, when we watched Nathaniel and Isabella grow up and become the people they were going to be, in the last years, when she would lean against the railing with her tea and say very little, and I would stand beside her and understand that the silence was enough. It was still enough. Isabella had her hands wrapped around her cup, her shoulder close to her brother's, the jacket I'd given her 3 hours ago still around her shoulders, because neither of us had thought to replace it with something warmer, and she hadn't asked. Nathaniel looked sideways at her. "Have you decided on a name?" he asked. Isabella smiled. It was the small, certain smile of someone who made this decision a long time ago, and is glad to finally say it out loud. "Charlotte Rose," she said. "After Mum." The words landed gently in the quiet. Nathaniel looked at his tea, nodded once slowly the way he does when something matters enough that he doesn't want to rush past it. I looked out at the skyline. "Charlotte Rose Harrington," I said. The name had weight. The right kind, not the heavy kind that comes from expectation, but the grounded kind that comes from continuity. A name that meant something in this city, carried now by someone who hadn't yet arrived, and already had more people watching over her than she would probably ever know. She'll know how to read a room before she can read a book, I said. So she'll know the difference between a man who opens a door because he respects you and a man who opens a door because he wants you to think he does. I turned my cup in my hands. She'll know what a real handshake feels like, and she'll know when the smile doesn't reach the eyes. She will not spend 7 years learning what I could teach her in 7 conversations. You're going to terrify her future partners, Nathaniel said. Oh, good, I said. Isabella laughed, the same surprised, real sound she'd made in the car when Charlotte kicked unguarded and warm and completely herself. You'll be a very strict grandfather, she said. I'll be a very patient one, I said. I looked at her. I've had 5 years of practice at patience. It turns out I'm better at it than I thought I was. Isabella held my gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the city. I keep thinking about what you said in there, she said, about standing behind me instead of holding my hand. She turned her cup slowly. I think I've been doing that wrong too, with Charlotte. I keep thinking I need to have everything fixed before she gets here. The right situation, the right home, the right... She stopped. But maybe that's not how it works. It's not, Nathaniel said. You just have to be there. The rest is improvised. Spoken like someone who has never raised a child, Isabella said. Spoken like someone who watched Dad raise 2, he said, with varying degrees of success. One quite smooth, I said. One more complicated. Which one am I? Nathaniel asked. Isabella and I looked at each other, said nothing. Nathaniel shook his head and looked back at the skyline. The tea was warm. The air was cold, the way October air is cold after midnight in Chicago, clean and direct, with the faint smell of the lake underneath everything. A police siren moved somewhere in the distance and faded. A light in a building across the way went off, someone finally going to sleep, the city making its small, ordinary adjustments. Come here, I said to Isabella. She turned. I placed my hand gently against the side of her stomach. The same gesture, the same spot where I'd felt Charlotte move in the car. The place that had been the still center of this entire night, without any of us saying so. Nathaniel moved closer and set his hand beside mine. Isabella looked at both of us. Then she placed her own hand over ours. 3 generations in a line. The one here, the one arriving, and somewhere behind both of us. The one who had set all of this in motion 11 years ago, with a letter and a trust, and a particular way of thinking 3 moves ahead. Charlotte moved, not the single decisive kick from the car. Something longer and more exploratory this time. A slow movement from one side to the other, as if she were taking stock, checking the perimeters, deciding what she thought about all of this. My granddaughter, already surveying her situation, already thorough. She's going to be trouble, Nathaniel said softly. She's going to be extraordinary, I said. Isabella looked down at our hands. Her eyes were bright but steady, the look of someone standing at the edge of something large and choosing deliberately to step toward it rather than back. I looked out at the city one more time. The sky to the east was still dark, but there was the faintest shift in the quality of it. Not light yet, just the suggestion that light was coming. The slow, absolute process of a night ending and something else beginning the way it always does, regardless of what has happened in the hours before. A new chapter for the Harringtons, I said, not loudly, just to the night, to the city, to the woman standing beside me and the one who wasn't quite here yet. It's almost morning, Nathaniel said. Yeah, Mom, I said. I looked at Isabella, at the skyline, at the 3 hands resting together in the dark. It is. She arrived at 6 o'clock in the morning. April in Chicago, the month the city finally commits to warmth, when the lake shifts from gray to tentative blue, and the light through hospital windows turns generous, almost kind. The cry was short and immediate, not distressed, declarative, the sound of someone who has arrived and wants the room to know it. I had been in the corridor for 4 hours. Nathaniel beside me for most of it, his coffee long cold, his phone face down on the chair between us. When the nurse opened the door, her face told us before her words did. "Mr. Harrington, you can come in." Isabella was propped against the pillows with the exhausted brightness of someone who has just done something very hard and is still running on the energy of having done it. Damp hair at the temples, quietly, completely satisfied. In her arms, Charlotte Rose Harrington. White blanket, blue and pink stripe at the edge. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Isabella looked up when I walked in and held out her arms slightly. The gesture of someone offering the most important thing they have ever held. I sat beside the bed and took my granddaughter for the first time. She was the weight of a decision. That's the only way I know to describe it, something that changes every calculation you've made about the future and makes you glad it did. She was asleep. Her face carried a furrow between the brows that I recognized without being able to explain. Eleanor's furrow. The one she got when she was reading something interesting and didn't want to be interrupted. Charlotte opened her eyes slightly, just enough to assess the available light. Dark. Watchful. Already taking stock. "Look at her eyes," Isabella said softly. "She has yours, Dad." "She has yours," I said. We left it there. Nathaniel came through the door and stopped when he saw me holding her. Every layer of composure he wears like a second skin went briefly absent. Then it came back. Mostly. "How is she?" he asked. "Perfect," Isabella said. No qualification. Nathaniel looked at his phone. Something shifted in his face. Quietly. The sentencing was this morning. Federal Court, Northern District. The judge ran the counts consecutively: conspiracy, attempted poisoning, bigamy, fraud, money laundering. A pause. He won't be released in his lifetime. The room held that for a moment. Charlotte made a small sound in her sleep. Just a breath catching and releasing. He was shouting in the courtroom. Nathaniel said carefully, "Your name, Bella." When the sentence was read, Isabella looked down at Charlotte, touched the edge of her blanket, straightened a fold that didn't need straightening. I can't hear it anymore," she said. Simply. Finally. Whatever he was saying, it doesn't reach me. The only sound that matters in this room is her breathing. Nathaniel set his phone face down on the windowsill. "Then that's the last time that name enters any room Charlotte is in," I said. "We don't read from that chapter again." Nobody argued. Nathaniel pulled a chair to the other side of the bed and leaned forward to look at Charlotte's face. "Hello," he said in the careful tone of a man new to addressing people who cannot yet respond. "I'm your uncle, the better-looking one. There's only one of you," Isabella said. Comparatively speaking, Charlotte's brow furrowed. She was not impressed. I stood and carried her to the window. The city was waking up, the lake visible in the distance, silver blue in the early light, the skyline sharpening as the sun came fully over the horizon. A new day doing what new days do, without ceremony, without waiting for anyone to be ready. I held Charlotte toward the glass. Not dramatically. Just enough that the morning light fell across her face, the same light falling on the entire city, on everything that would someday be hers, to navigate in her own time and her own way. She blinked, considered the light, decided it was acceptable. "Your grandmother built a trust in your name before you were born," I said quietly. "Your mother stood in a room full of people and didn't break. Your uncle drove very fast on your behalf." I looked at her face. "You come from good stock, Charlotte Rose." Behind me, Isabella said nothing, but I heard her smile. The old story is closed," I said to the light, to the city, to the small person in my arms who had arrived precisely on time. Everything that happened before this morning, it happened so this morning could exist. I looked at her face in the early light. But you, Charlotte Rose Harrington, you are something entirely new." The city moved below us. The lake held its color. The sun kept climbing. And in a hospital room on the north side of Chicago at 6 o'clock on an April morning, a new chapter of the Harrington story took its first breath and decided the light was worth staying for. They say God gives every man exactly what he needs, not what he asks for, and rarely when he wants it. 5 years ago, I asked for a shortcut. What I received instead was patience. I didn't understand the difference at the time. I do now. If there is a lesson in all of this, in the 7 years of waiting, the documents, the quiet mornings parked beneath my daughter's window, it is not that you should do what I did. It is precisely the opposite. Don't wait the way I waited. Don't let pride and strategy replace the simple act of knocking on a door. Don't convince yourself that silence is protection when it is sometimes just silence. I built a perfect trap and nearly lost my daughter inside it. The plan worked. The cost was real. True family justice begins long before any courtroom. It begins the evening you choose presence over strategy. Say the hard thing earlier. Be there imperfectly rather than absent perfectly. The people you love don't need a flawless architect. They need you available, honest, and willing to be wrong. That is my belief. Stated plainly, family justice is not a verdict delivered in a ballroom. It is every quiet daily choice to show up for the people who carry your name and your blood. This has been a grandpa story, not the kind I would have chosen, but the kind that arrives regardless and demands you become equal to it. Every honest grandpa story comes down to one thing: being on the street below the window even when no one knows you are there. And every real family justice story ends the same way, not with a sentencing, but with a child blinking at morning light and deciding it is worth staying for. My name is Edward Harrington, and this grandpa story ends here. If this story moves something in, you leave a word below, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe if you want to be here when the next chapter begins. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements built for reflection and education. If that is not for you, no hard feelings. Find what serves you better. For everyone else, see you in the next one.